Jen, thank you so much for joining us today. Our program is all about food and how it can help our bodies, but also in some cases harm our bodies. And I wanted to explore that side a little bit more with you and tell us, are there certain ways that food actually isn't good for us?
Well, food in general has nutrients, and it's the certain nutrients that can be more harmful.
Okay, can you give us an example of some that we should kind of be on the lookout for?
Sure. One would be trans fat,
Okay.
or excess sugar, sodium, excess saturated fat.
Okay.
Those would be some key ones to look for.
All right, and if you have too much trans fat in your diet, what does that lead to? How would that harm your body?
So trans fat actually is a leading contributor to heart disease, even more so than the cholesterol that you would eat or the saturated fat that you would eat. So there's lots of research on that. So it's something that you really want to limit, minimize, or avoid, really, at all costs.
So it's going to kind of plug up your arteries.
Exactly.
All right.
Yes,
All right.
cause artery clogging.
And too much sugar. You know, you mentioned too much because there's going to be some sugar in our diet anyway.
Right. There are natural sugars and then there are added sugars. So natural sugars are in things like fruits, milks, and then certain grains. Excess sugar, which usually is tied to foods that don't have a lot of nutritional value anyway, consuming a lot of that can contribute to obesity, which then leads to higher risk for heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure. So
All
it just
of those
kind of
things.
keeps rolling. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And saturated fat is another one that I think people have a lot of confusion about.
Saturated fat, again, is that leads into the heart disease. So trans fat does, but saturated fat does as well. So it can negatively impact your cholesterol levels. So increases your cholesterol, increases your LDL, which is your bad cholesterol. So you kind of want to make sure that you don't get too much of that as well.
Okay. Does it matter how food is prepared? Sometimes you hear folks say highly processed food is not good for you. Why would that be?
Well, highly processed food, you know, it depends on what it is, but highly processed food tends to have a lot of ingredients. And so there are some things out there that maybe you can't even pronounce on the ingredient label.
Sure.
So in some cases, you might want to avoid that. If you can't pronounce it, do you want to have it in your body? You know, chemicals and things like that. But you can also balance that out and have healthier things along with the convenience types of foods too.
Okay. All right. Let's take a look at some examples of things that you might find or might be on your grocery list when you're shopping. And let's start with the trans fats piece. I think there were some surprising things that we saw when we went through the store that I didn't expect to see. And really you have to become a label reader, but something that is as common and convenient, you know, as a ready-made mix that you can make a ton of things from, has trans fat in it.
Has trans fat in it. So the recommendation is to have less than 2 grams per day of trans fat. But the American Heart Association actually recommends 0.
0. Okay.
So you might, like this one for instance, had 1.5 grams per serving. So it's not something that you'd want to consume a lot of, and you could maybe even make your own version at home that wouldn't contain that as well.
So that is the alternative, is to kind of mix
Yes.
those basic ingredients together to create your own kind of ready mix.
Right. And I think the other thing to think about is on the label where it says trans fat, it can say 0 grams, but still legally contain 0.49 grams. And so then the next step is to look at the ingredient list to see if it has hydrogenated oil in it. And that would be the key.
And is that just partially hydrogenated oil or any
Any
kind?
hydrogenation, because it's changing the type of the fat that it is.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Let's talk a little bit about sugar. Sugar can be hidden in a number of places too,
Yes, it can.
which we found. And so looking at labels and ingredients in the list, fruit obviously is a natural sugar, but sometimes you need to check the label to see if there's something else in there. Give us a primer on how we might identify good fruit for our diets.
So yes, fruit in general is very healthy. So what you want to look for in canned fruit specifically is to either have it in its light syrup or in a 100% juice.
Okay.
When it's in heavy syrup, that just means excess sugar. You could rinse that off if you choose to.
Okay.
And then you'd just be left with the actual fruit.
Okay,
and
so
having
that's one
the
way you
sugar.
could combat that?
Yes, you could. Yes.
All right. Sounds good. And sugar is also found in some things that we might not think of. We were in the bread aisle. And something like a regular loaf of white bread. Actually has sugar in it. And people don't always think of that. And sometimes even talk a little bit about high fructose corn syrup. That is a sugar that is maligned. And is that rightfully so?
Well, you know, I think of it, high fructose corn syrup is similar to just adding regular sugar to a product. It's still a form of sweetener that's chemically processed, and so you're just getting excess calories from it basically, but no nutritional value. So there is a lot of hype out there about high fructose corn syrup. And I think you just have to make a personal decision on whether you want to continue to include that in your diet. But if you're going to exclude it, then sugar itself is still the same. So you kind of have to make that decision for everything.
And watching labels
Right.
as well, and ingredients list. Let's talk ingredients a little bit. When you mentioned trans fats, you should look for hydrogenated oil on the ingredients list.
Right.
Sugar has many names. What other things should people look for?
Evaporated cane juice, for instance, or brown rice syrup. Those two are more popular now because people are recognizing sugar or high fructose corn syrup, so they're trying to get an alternate version out there.
Okay.
So those would be things that you could look for, and especially if it's in like one of the first 3 ingredients.
Okay.
That means that it's pretty high up in the ingredient level. So they list them from most to least. So if it's higher up, it's going to be more in the product.
Okay.
And so the other thing to think about too with bread is that it will have natural sugar in it from the grain itself, but it's excess
that
can be
causes
added.
the problem.
Yes.
And an alternative to a classic white bread is you have other kinds of breads that don't have some of those added sugars. Okay, so you just have to check on the shelf.
Right.
Those are
And
some
sugar
options.
is actually needed in bread making. So there shouldn't be a lot of it in there, but there will be a small
should be
amount.
some.
Yeah.
Another thing, bread, that we found when we were reading labels in the store was sodium. Tell us a little bit about what you should look for when you're looking at breads, and why sodium is a number that you should take a look at.
Sure. Sodium is a lot in the news lately, and that's basically tied to high blood pressure. More and more Americans are getting that. In fact, the most recent statistic was 90% of American adults will eventually develop high blood pressure.
Wow.
So that's
a huge
almost
number.
everybody.
Yeah, that's right.
And so everybody then should still watch the amount of salt that they're taking in. So the recommendation is 2,300 milligrams a day.
Okay.
If you have high blood pressure or a strong family history of it, it's 1,500 milligrams a day.
Okay.
And so when you're looking at a product on the nutrition label, you want to look for about 200 milligrams or less per serving. That's kind of a good range to be in when you're checking out a food.
Okay, sounds good. One item that people often think about when they're thinking high salt is they often think of soups.
Soups, yes.
That's a common culprit.
Yes.
But the interesting thing that we found about our soup can is it also has sugar.
Yes.
And that surprised. A friend of mine said that she found sugar in her tomato soup, and she thought that was really unusual. Why is it that that ingredient is included in some products where we don't really expect it?
Sure. Well, a lot of it is for mouthfeel and flavor.
Okay.
Sugar provides a lot of sweetness. Naturally, all of us prefer sweetness when we eat it.
Okay, so it's just kind of built into us.
Yes, and not all soups will have sugar, but tomato, for instance, it's kind of a sweeter type of a soup. But if you went towards a chicken noodle, there shouldn't be any sugar in there at all, other than the natural that comes from the noodles and the broth. So
Okay, all right.
anything
so
starchy
salt
will have that.
and sugar are both some things to take a look at on the ingredient.
And soups are now actually lowering their salt content. Little by little, they're trying to make changes in that. So the canned varieties.
Slowly change our palate.
Yes, exactly. And that's what you have to do, is slowly do it. Otherwise, a dramatic change, you tend to kind of refuse the food.
And
then.
people won't buy the product.
Exactly.
All right. Saturated fat. Red meat is often listed as the culprit. Tell us
Yes.
about that.
So, a lot of that deals with heart disease, which is the #1 killer in the United States. But the second leading cause of death is cancer. And so red meat with the saturated fat and the other compounds in the meat can contribute to both of those things.
Okay.
So you want to minimize that to less than 18 ounces a week is the recommendation from the American Cancer Society, as well as the American Heart Association. And when you're having it, make sure you're having something healthier with it. And also look for leaner cuts. That's also a good tip. Anything with the word loin or round in the title of the cut will be leaner.
Helpful
And you can also look at the marbling. If there's a lot of marbling, it's going to be fattier.
Right.
If there's not a lot of marbling, it's going to be leaner itself too.
Okay. A lot of meats, I'm thinking chicken or pork had that slogan for a long time, the other white meat.
Yes.
Is it any kind of meat, or is it really the red meat of beef, lamb?
Red meat specifically. So
Okay.
pork, beef specifically are the ones that are most contributory. And if you're grilling, we have summer coming up with a lot of grilling, charring the meat contributes to cancer.
So the way you prepare your food
yes,
is important
is also
as well.
important too.
All right. All right. Sounds good. And highly processed. That's not an ingredient, but let's look at some
Yes.
things that are highly processed. And again, you mentioned ingredients list. It's hard to see here, but on the end of this box, you can see the ingredients list. And this is a frozen TV dinner that you might serve your children, and it's convenient and it's quick. But is it really that good for you?
Well, there's certain ingredients in there that would provide protein and fiber and there's some corn in there that would have some vegetables. And when you pair that with maybe a nice salad that your kids would eat, or a whole bowl of fresh fruit, you know, it can be, in a pinch, that would be something that someone could do, but it's not something that you should probably do all the time.
On a regular basis.
Yes.
And as you said, perhaps add some things to this meal to help balance it.
Balance is key with that, yes, exactly.
Okay, all right. One of the items that we found in the store that I think was quite surprising as well was, again, referring to sodium content. Raisin Bran cereal, Raisin Bran is good for us, high fiber, but yet there is a large amount of sodium in Raisin Bran.
Yes, and so that salt can make other flavors be enhanced. So sometimes some salt will be added to bring out even the sweetness of what's already naturally in the product. So yes, you just have to be a little bit leery about the things that you're currently buying, and you know, there's a lot of marketing on the front of a package, but look at the nutrition facts label.
That's behind it. All right. In our conversation about saturated fats, often people think of cholesterol, and shrimp is an item that for a long time they said, don't eat shrimp. It's got all this cholesterol. If you look at the label on here, if you look at the label on the back, 42% of your daily. I mean, that would scare a lot of people away.
Yes, especially if you have high cholesterol, right?
Right. But some new information is coming out and saying maybe that's not.
Yes. What contributes more to your cholesterol levels are trans fat and saturated fat intake.
Okay.
Cholesterol itself doesn't necessarily contribute that much to your cholesterol levels. Plus, you actually make cholesterol in your body. And so that's naturally there. It's the other, you know, the trans fat and the saturated fat that I would tend to worry about more.
Okay. All right. Just turn that over.
And shrimp, seafood itself is just a healthy way to get lean protein.
Okay.
That generally doesn't have a lot of fat tied in with it.
Right. You wouldn't.
You know, hardly any usually.
Yep.
Salmon, though, would have some, but that's actually a really healthy fat, the omega-3 content.
And typically unbreaded.
Typically unbreaded, but you could, you know, bread it at home in a healthier way. Use some whole wheat breadcrumbs, use a little minimal amount of oil, or even use, you know, like a nonstick cooking spray, something like that. Can add a lot of flavor and get the family to eat it when they might not ordinarily eat it.
Okay. Sounds
You don't
good.
have to heavily coat it.
Help folks with label reading. You know, so many of these you have to read big long lists of ingredients, or you have to check. I mean, we have nutrition labels on the ends of these boxes and packages.
Yes.
What should they be looking for?
So, you know, what can really make it easier is to use a tool that we actually have in Hy-Vee, and it's called NuVal.
Oh,
And that takes into account everything that is on the nutrition label.
okay.
Over 30 different nutrients, and it takes into account, you know, all of the good stuff, and then the few things that we've talked about with the negative nutrients that negatively impact health. It also takes that into account as well.
Okay, so it kind of gives you the balance. You know, some things will be good, some things not so good.
Right, and well, you know, the range goes from 1 to 100. So the higher the number, the healthier the food.
Okay.
But there isn't a number where you should not eat, because, for instance, butter is a 1 on the NuVal scale. Now, if having a little butter gets you to eat a cup and a half of vegetables at night, you know, that is okay to do.
Little
It's
give and
just,
take.
yeah, moderation and balance.
All right.
But as far as the nutrition label, you know, you want to always make sure serving size is what you look at first.
Okay.
Because what you eat and what the package actually says could be two totally different things.
Sure. Sure. All
Yes.
right. You could find out you're eating twice as much as you
Exactly.
thought you were.
Yes.
All right. Are there any other sources that people can turn to besides learning how to decipher either a NuVal score on the grocery shelf or the nutrition panel on the end of a box? Where else can people turn to for help in deciphering kind of this rather confusing?
Sure. Well, I think, almost all of the Hy-Vees, there's a registered dietitian on staff.
Okay.
So that's a great way to go get personalized
Check your
advice.
local grocery store.
Yes,
Okay.
check your local grocery store. And it's, it's like right there at the store level where you are buying the food. It makes the most sense, really, to get the help right there.
Any online resources that you trust? There's a lot of information out there, and especially in food and nutrition, what's good one day is bad the next.
I tend to go with MayoClinic.com. It's a really good source. Our Hy-Vee.com website also has a lot of good nutritional information that is sound as well.
All right, sounds good. Temptations are hard to resist, and sweets, you said we're automatically programmed for that.
Yes.
How do you help people balance their general nutrition without restricting them from some of those things, that will eventually cause people to fall off the bandwagon of a good diet?
Right. I always encourage the positive over the negative. So what can you be eating to be healthy versus don't eat this, don't eat that, because then that really turns you off basically, and you
Right.
want it more actually. So everything can be included in a healthy diet. It's just a matter of how much you eat of it, how frequently you eat of it.
Okay.
So, you know,
Alright.
include a little chocolate every now and then, but make it the dark chocolate that gives you more antioxidants.
Mm-hmm.
Just have a small amount, you know. It's just all about balancing everything out.
All right. Let's take a look at what a plate might look like that you would recommend to folks
Yes.
to actually fill. And give us the proportion. I love the rule of thumb on these plates.
Yes. So you could think of it as half plate healthy.
Half
And so,
plate healthy.
Yes.
Okay.
So what that really means is half your plate being fruits and vegetables.
Okay. So here we've got raspberries, carrots, some broccolini, or
Broccolette. Yeah.
All right.
And so the portion of that, you know, if you can get a good 2 cups of fruits and vegetables
Okay.
at a sitting, you're going to actually feel fuller because of all the fiber, but the calorie content of that is so low that it's going to basically make a big impact on the other foods that you won't
Right.
you won't keep going back for more of
Right.
what else you have.
Okay.
So
All right. Then also important to have, what is it, a quarter
whole,
of your
yeah,
plate?
a quarter of your plate is whole grain.
Okay.
So that could be brown rice, it could be whole grain pasta, it could be even like a sweet potato because that's more starchy.
Okay. Mhm.
Corn, something like that as well.
Okay. And then the remaining quarter is left for lean meats, which can include red meat on
Oh,
occasion.
definitely.
Would also
Yes.
include chicken, pork,
Turkey,
beans.
seafood, yes, all of that. And a serving of meat is about 3 to 4 ounces.
Okay, so something
So-
like this is probably just a smidge
It's about
too
four-
large.
Once it cooks down, it's going to be around 4
Okay,
ounces.
so just a tad bit smaller than something like this.
Sure, yes. But yeah, the meats can fit, and protein is very important in our diet. It's just that we don't need a lot of it.
Okay,
So having that small amount will be filling.
sounds good. Many of these things that we have selected today are things that you would prepare at home. Is it
Yes.
any easier to avoid or make good choices, to avoid the bad things that would harm our health and make good choices when you're eating out in a restaurant?
Well, eating out can be harder because you're looking at a menu, you don't necessarily see the nutrition facts that come with that. In some restaurants, they are available in a brochure. That's going to become more and more popular on the menu as a calorie notation if a chain has more than 20 restaurants. That legislation has passed and it's coming.
so that's coming.
So that's something to be aware of. You can also actually go on websites of the restaurants, and they sometimes will have the nutritional information there.
Okay.
But I always feel like eating at home is just a healthier option. You are in control of what the ingredients are, how much you're eating of it. And it also just allows you to have some more relaxed time with the family, bonding, which also contributes to other healthy behaviors too.
All right.
So
Sounds
yeah.
good. Jen, thank you so much
You're
for helping us
welcome. Thank you.
navigate this complicated world.
Yes, thank you.
All right.